Talking about what you mentioned earlier, as far as it being a story that we can't feed the world, and that is a story. It is not true.
It's a for-profit story.
It's a for-profit story. Yes, yes. So we absolutely can feed everybody. We could do it now. The issue is distribution. It's not even production at this level. It's just not distributing it. And a lot of what keeps regions that are productive in poverty also is just access to market. So the market's controlled, and really that's what's creating hunger.
Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Check. Today, Paul talks with permaculture teacher and ecological designer Michael Judd. Michael has worked with agroecological and whole system designs throughout the Americas for nearly 2 decades. His projects increase local food security and community health in both tropical and temperate growing regions. He is the author of Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist and the founder of Project Bonafide, an international non-profit supporting agroecology research. Stay tuned to the end of the podcast for some special offers from Michael.
Well, our podcast today is titled Food and Your Future with my guest, Michael Judd. Michael, it's really exciting to have you on the show. I learned about you from my friend and client, Scott Ford, who's working with you to create sustainable food and income, which I'm very excited about as well, just the concept and knowing he's involved in that. And you're also engaging some of my other clients, which I think is fantastic. And I really enjoyed your book, Edible Landscape with a Permaculture Twist. I thought it was fantastic. Very, very beautifully done, by the way. And what I would like to do is if you could just share a little bit about your journey, Michael, and how you ultimately ended up working in the fields of sustainable housing, gardening, and farming.
Sure. Very cool to be on the 4D wave with you, Paul. And
thank you.
Yeah, my journey began working with natural systems 22 years ago in the Lacandon Jungle that stretches between current-day southern Mexico and Guatemala. I lived a period there with the Lacandon Maya, who are the last of the Mayan tribes that escaped the conquistadores over 500 years ago, basically by surviving deep in the jungle out of reach. And they survived by integrating into the rainforest and also through a very strong shamanic-centered culture. I was living at the time in the highlands of southern Mexico when I met a young Lacandon man who had come out of the jungle. He was seeking help from digestive disorders. What was happening was that the jungle that they lived in was getting smaller, it was shrinking, it was getting cut down. And the Lacandon communities were being forced into smaller and smaller areas. And traditionally, they had kept the balance of their human waste streams with the space in the jungle. But as they got collectively closer together, those systems, dogs were getting into the jungle, eating feces, kids were walking around on the dog feces. So parasite cycles were speeding up. And this young man was coming out looking for help. And through a bunch of different gestulations, we figured out what was going on. And I had an idea about, helping build compost toilets, which was something that I'd been doing in different parts of Latin America already. And basically just helps contain, human manure. So it's not getting into the systems, around us. So he agreed, and he let me come back into the jungle with him. Basically a 4-day journey up an old dry riverbed into the heart of the jungle. And so began my experience living there and building a compost toilet out of the jungle, the rainforest that surrounded their community, which when I first arrived just looked like a wild jungle, untouched. But as I lived there and started working with harvesting from it, I realized that it was very intimately managed as a perennial polyculture. They were getting their food from it, their medicines from it, their fibers from it, their fodder for their animals. They were building materials with it. It was this living, system that they were living in and working with. And it blew my mind. For the first time, I I was experiencing the potential of humans to actually live in this regenerative way. And that began my journey. From there, I actually got very sick living in the jungle. Most of the things I was trying to help eradicate, I pretty much got carried out of the jungle. And that also began a strong journey in my life of healing my body. So combined with that, I started working with, biodynamic agriculture. I came back to the States and started working with permaculture. And then over the years, I just kept bouncing back and forth between Latin America and the U.S., a little bit of Europe, working with indigenous knowledge of growing systems and then permaculture, and kind of, has led to where I'm at now, working with edible landscapes and agroforestry back here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's amazing. Clearly to me, your soul was setting up all the necessary stages to bring you to the progressive development of what's now unfolded in your whole life. It sounds like when you're talking there and you're describing how well managed the jungle was, the first thing that comes to my mind is that, most people have this kind of concept in their head that primitive people were not intelligent, or that they were stupid, or they didn't have advanced technologies. But when you're describing how they were managing that jungle and living off of it, it sounds like they have technologies that in some ways are more advanced than what we have today, because what we think of as advanced technology is actually diminishing survivability and diminishing health and diminishing resources and causing all sorts of problems.
Yeah, they are some of the most powerful people I've come across in all my journeys on the planet. And they have been able to live on, in the same region, for over 500 years, and keeping their systems regenerative, keeping them productive, keeping their culture and their health and everything going. And if you juxtapose that against the way we're using land, it's not as savvy.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the lesson that we're all collectively en route to learning. I also would like to say, I'm sure you're very aware of this too, is that there's a strong emergence now in the last 10 or more years, but it's really getting strong now, with an emergence in interest in native cultures and Native American cultures and shamanism. And pretty much it's almost like we're realizing that there was real deep wisdom in these things. And now there's this potentially growing interest in incorporating some of the ideas that were once thought to be antiquated and that most so-called educated people just turned their nose up to.
Yes, we need guides. And, the shamanic culture, not even just shamanic culture, just, intact cultures, had examples and guidance for life's experiences. And largely we're losing that and replacing it, with cell phones and internet. So yeah, we're losing our roots. So we're coming back.
Yeah, well, thank the Lord for that. As I was reading through your book, I did what I always do and let my soul guide me to what it wanted me to read to prepare for the interview. And the first place it took me was to the last chapter, your story. And you were describing there how natives were suffering through drought and starving. And you shared that your investigation made you aware that there was a global pattern of land use and economy, that countries like Nicaragua were pushed by debtors such as the IMF, Wall Street banks, and so forth, to accept new structures of land use and cash crops to maximize short-term returns. You continued by sharing that cash cropping relies largely on annuals like rice, beans, corn, all annuals that frequently fail and employ slash and burn use. You finished by saying the news of hunger was no longer shocking to me. So sadly, Michael, it's highly probable that most of the people listening to this podcast have little or no idea what the rest of the world, particularly the less developed countries, are paying for American consumerism. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to open up Pandora's box a little and give us an overview of just what is taking place so that we, the rest of us that often pretend there's an endless food supply and focus on the latest fashions, iPhones, video games, BMWs, or trendy fashions can realize that the cost of living that way is not only a real stress on the land, but it's a serious stress on people, other natives and other people in less technologically developed countries all over the world.
Yeah, we took an erroneous turn a couple generations ago when we began treating food as a commodity and trading it internationally. That really shifted the landscape around the globe. And also, it was patterned with debt relief. So a country like Nicaragua, needed lending by IMF or other large lending institutions. And they had to accept dictates to receive these loans. And cash cropping to sort of meet the demands of the commodity market. They were really wholesale educated and switched over from what was a more diverse agriculture that included perennial tree crops and wildlife habitat for hunting, access to naturally grown medicinals and fibers and all the things I mentioned earlier, to cash cropping of annual crops, rice, beans, corn, tobacco. And the methodology has been to cut the forest, slash it, and burn it, and then go ahead and till the soil and sow annual crops. Now, these areas also get really heavy rainfall, and most small farmers are on marginal land, so it's sloped. So in just one generation, the soil has literally slid off the land and has disappeared, gone into the water, gone into the waterways, and left people with absolutely nothing. They left them with hunger. And surprisingly, I'm always amazed at how quickly culture can change, even traditional cultures. I lived in Latin America for almost 18 years. I lived in Nicaragua for 12 years, working with perennial agricultural systems, working on trying to create food security, trying to bring back some of that perennial culture, just to kind of create a buffer from hunger. And so when the soil is gone and they're relying on annuals, they've lost the tradition of how to work with perennial systems, how to go into the woods and the jungles and find what they need. So this has been played out all over the world, all over Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, certainly all over Latin America, to where now we're at a point where the soil has been highly degraded and the cultural traditions of working with a diversified land system have been lost. So literally, hunger is the norm in the world, and it's growing. We don't feel the effects so much in North America. We're really in a bubble from it. But if you travel and you get out and go around the world, you will see the effects that we've already created on our planet, largely with soil loss, and then also loss of tradition with more diverse systems. So we do have the ability to regenerate if we, do a combination of things. But,
very, very, interesting, but also sad. And as you're talking, two things come to my mind. I recently saw a statistic. I wish I could remember it, but it talked about what percentage of the forests of the world have now been cut down, either for the lumber industry, the farming industry, the cattle industry, et cetera. But it was very, very high. And, Steiner talks about how different parts of the Earth system are like organs, and the topsoil he describes as the stomach. He describes the topsoil as what he calls superficial digestion, and the forests and the trees as the lungs of the planet. So two questions, or one's a statement where we're kind of unconsciously growing these annual crops for cash crops, as you described, without the awareness that we're dangerously reducing the amount of trees on the planet, which, as most people know, are very important for providing oxygen. What people also aren't so aware of, and I'm sure you're aware of, is that when we have trees and foliage, it covers the earth, and those plants and trees use sunlight to create photosynthesis. They grow root systems, they protect the earth, they support the retention of water, the maintenance of a more consistent temperature. And as we're eroding the lungs of the planet and eroding the topsoil of the planet, we're basically changing the biodynamics, if you will, of the living system called Gaia. And I don't remember exactly, but you might know, what does it take, something like 1 million years to create an inch of topsoil?
Not necessarily 1 million, and that's by natural, means. As humans, we can speed up topsoil regeneration, within a year or two. But yes, by natural terms, you're probably looking at hundreds of years to build back up what's lost, in a single rain event.
Right. So one of the things I wanted to share, because it leads to some other questions, is in my library I have quite an interesting book called Thoughts on Feeding by L.J. Picton, Faber and Faber, London, 1946. And in the book he shares that by 1937, erosion by water and wind had claimed 250 million acres of the total land of the U.S. formerly under crops, 61% of the whole. That was 1937. So when you consider that, my understanding is that the degree of land destruction that he's talking about was created by monocropping and overexposure to machines, because there wasn't that much chemical use at all in 1937. That didn't really start kicking off till after the Second World War, where they figured out they could use munitions factories to create chemical fertilizers and keep the military-industrial complex profitable. So where do you feel we're at today with regard to the loss of arable land in the United States, with regard to the expansion of commercial farming and the use of farming chemicals since then?
We've come a long way. We've lost an enormous amount of our topsoil, which is really, even in economic terms, the platform that we're all standing on. So you could even take this, more to a black and white reality of how we're operating day to day economically. This topsoil is literally what we are based on. So it going downstream, literally, if you look at the Mississippi River where it washes out, down there in the Gulf, it's just a huge area. It's a big bloom of soil, basically. You can literally see how it's been washed out, lost. And then you combine that with chemical use, what's left is an infertile, basically bedrock, that you can't just jump back in on and start regenerating and growing food in a short amount of time. This is a pattern that's old, with the Mayan city-states like Tikal, was purportedly up to 1 million people, and it collapsed. And the largest understanding for that is just the exhaustion of the soil and the resources around it. And then the Romans as well. I think a large reason for their empire was not being able to keep up with feeding everybody because of the loss of arable soil. So we're doing the same thing that we've done historically. The difference is now that it's on a global scale, and the machinery and the chemicals that we use, have sped it up enormously. And yes, this reality of lost soil is going to begin to become more evident to everybody in our economics. It's already evident in the quality of our food. The insecurity of food access being grown at far distances. But, I think it's going to hit most people who aren't thinking agriculturally, environmentally. It's going to hit economically.
Yeah. One of the things that, it drives this whole commercial farming industry and the use of massive amounts of machinery and massive amounts of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, or better known as the chemical industry, which, as I mentioned earlier, is an extension of the munitions industry in many ways. is this whole concept that we have too many people on the planet and we can't produce enough food organically to feed the population. Yet, in my years of research on these topics, traveling around the world, one of my hobbies is to find rare bookstores and search through them for interesting books, of which I have a very large collection of really excellent books. One of the books I came across was published in 1911. It's called Farmers of 40 Centuries, or Permanent Agriculture in China, Korea, and Japan, by F.H. King, formerly professor of agricultural physics in the University of Wisconsin, and chief division of soil management. And he was the chief of the division of soil management of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Now, what's interesting about this book is, one, it was published in 1911, but what they did was they kept getting reports of how much food the farmers that were considered to be very primitive and even backwards and often joked about by American farmers was how in the hell were these people producing so much food? I think China at the time, only 14% of its land mass was arable, but they have, a very large population. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture wanted Dr. King to go investigate to find out how it is that they're able to feed all these people. The book is an expose of that, and it's too much to explain in this podcast, but it's pretty profound. But I want to share something right out of the book that makes a shocking point as a counter argument to this whole, what I believe to be cooked up idea for profit, reasons of profit, is that the idea being that we can't feed the population without using chemical and commercial farming technologies. And I'm quoting directly from the book. While in the Shantung province, this is China, King visited a holding that was 1 2/3 acres, where the farmer had 10 in his family and was maintaining 1 donkey and 1 pig, showing for his farm land and maintenance capacity of 3,840 people, 24 donkeys, and 384 pigs to the square mile. So what they're saying is that when they took what he was producing on 1 2/3 of an acre and said, well, if we gave this guy a square mile, how much food would he be able to produce? And he could feed 3,840 people, 24 donkeys, and 384 pigs. Or comparatively, he could feed 240 people, 24 donkeys, and 24 pigs to one of our American 40-acre farms, which most farmers regard as too small for a single family.
Yeah. So the crux of this is that there in China, they've been using full circle, growing systems, very much like biodynamics. You work with whole farm systems where the animals, are producing the manure and the compost, it's feeding the soil. You're using, lots of different preps. Everything is cycling back into it. So it's a circular system, right? And everybody's involved. There's a lot of labor, there's a lot of family. Everybody's involved in doing their part. And all of their manure, too, is getting cycled and used. That's a very valuable resource. And
that's actually, I was just going to I don't mean to cut you off. I wanted to bring that up because I was sitting on that thought and you said exactly what I was thinking about. So you might be reading my mind. He calls that in the book midnight soil, and he shows pictures of villages where they would collect their own poop and pile it up. It what looked like just what I would have considered to be a compost pile on our farm. But today, research shows that if we started trying to compost human soil, we would destroy the topsoil because human feces is so toxic, it actually kills the beneficial microorganisms. Are you aware of that fact?
Yes, but I would be interested in using fungi to potentially, break down a lot of those. I mean, I think it's a very valuable resource that we do and we will need to come back to using. So I was going to juxtapose that circular system to our linear system of agriculture. We're bringing in these chemical fertilizers and machinery machinery, and then, we're exporting. So when you're farming a crop on the soil and you harvest it and you ship it away, it's gone. Your fertility has left. And then you bring in more artificial, materials, and it's linear. So it doesn't cycle back on itself, which basically means that, your soil and your fertility are leaving. But I want, one of my favorite parts of that book is when he tells the story about how along the roadways in China, back in the day, I don't know if it's still there, but the farmers would build these really beautiful, luxurious looking compost toilets, at the roadside, trying to attract travelers, to come and make their deposits. I mean, what a turnaround is that? They were vying for it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you mentioned with the linear concept, the linear, you mentioned they had a circular system, which is it's a system that reinvests in itself. Mm-hmm. What we've got is kind of like, it's like if you're a mother that buys diapers instead of washing your own diapers and reusing them, then every time you run out of diapers, you have to spend money, which means you have to go to work to make that money. Whereas if you're using cloth diapers and you're washing them, then you only have to really invest in the first set of cloth diapers. But one of the research papers that was forwarded to me by Dave Murphy from Food Democracy Now! Is a recently released scientific report that showed that something that they had no knowledge of till recently, and that was they used to think and were told by the chemical fertilizer manufacturers that the NPK fertilizers broke down in the soil and didn't disrupt anything. But now they're finding all over the world that the NPK fertilizers are not breaking down and that they're sinking into the rocks in the undersoil. And they say that the level of NPK fertilizer that's now trapped and has been saturated into the rocks is so high that when some of these areas start getting big rains and it washes into the rivers and makes it to the ocean, it could literally wipe out the ecosystem in the oceans and the rivers, bringing that in there. Are you familiar with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm talking to you right now from the North Shore of Oahu here in Hawaii, and it's just all dead reefs, all along the waterway here. And this largely from, human activity. And I've been, in sensitive reef systems and all around the world, and you do see the immediate impact of even low level nutrient loads, even just from, sewage. So yeah, what you're talking about is very devastational.
Yeah. And it's, this is, people don't realize it, but if we don't wake up and start voicing our opinions and using our dollars to support small local farmers and doing the kinds of things we're talking about in this podcast, we're headed for some kind of a nexus point or some kind of an omega point where life as we know it cannot go on. I mean, we got the Great Barrier Reef dying. You're talking about reefs dying there. We've got, animal species and fish species dying out like crazy. You see beached whales and reports of thousands of seals dying. And I've got a report in my library from, it was over on the East Coast of the United States. There was like 5,000 sea lions, I believe it was, that were dying like crazy. And they biologists did research, the marine biologists did research and found that they were all suffering from some kind of a viral infection that normally their immune systems can completely protect them against. But essentially what they tracked it down to is all the hormones from industrial waste in the water, in the ocean, disrupting their immune modulation and immune function. And they were no longer able to protect themselves from things that normally they wouldn't have any problem with at all. So it's really kind of, it's almost like we're playing Russian roulette.
We are. And if you add, genetically modified organisms into that, we're messing with the actual fabric of our makeup. And yeah, nexus is a nice metaphor.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the whole biohacking movement, aren't you?
Yeah,
Well, it really seems to me like the concept of biohacking, taking shortcuts is largely what it is, to try to trick the body into doing things that it may not do otherwise, instead of getting back to basics. I just did a podcast with Ben Greenfield and we got deep into the whole biohacking thing, but it almost seems to me like we have this teenage male spirit in science that has this urge to push the boundaries of everything to the very limit. Kind of like when you're 17 and you borrowed your mother's station wagon, and little did she know you were out burning the tires off of it and, pushing it to the extremes. And
into the horse track,
yeah, it's how far can this little game go on? It's getting to be dangerous enough that I want to talk to you about it and help people become more aware. One of the facts that I found in my research when I was doing some writing a few years back is that during the First and Second World War, they showed approximately 50% of the food eaten was grown in people's backyards. And that during these periods, there was not only a significant drop in disease rates, but that farming production in general went up significantly when the women took over farming because the men were off at war. And so this sort of plays into what we're coming to discuss here, is that, they had a choice: stand in bread lines or grow food in your backyard. And not only did 50% of people, 50% of the food was started coming from backyards, but people started getting healthier because a lot of the garbage that they were normally eating, they couldn't get access to or didn't have the money to buy. So I found that really interesting. And go ahead.
I was just going to, it's making me think of Cuba. Cuba was relying on oil from Russia and had developed their agriculture to be based on oil inputs, fertilizers, etc. And then, in 1989, when the wall came down, all of a sudden, Cuba was shut off, completely almost from, that source of oil input. And of course, the U.S. wasn't supporting them. And they've been this little microcosm, that has shown, how they've shifted from that intensive oil input system to creating, urban agricultural programs all across the country. They all pulled together and started growing on whatever piece of ground they could. And by 1997, they were eating as well, if not better than they were previous to 1989. So there's, this is an example that, yes, we can do this. And it brings me back to, talking about what you mentioned earlier, as far as it being a story that we can't feed the world. And that is a story. It is not true. It's
a for-profit story.
It's a for-profit story. Yes, yes. So we absolutely can feed everybody. A lot of we could do it now. The issue is distribution. It's not even production at this level. It's just not distributing it. And a lot of what keeps regions that are productive in poverty also is just access to market. So the market's controlled, and really that's what's creating hunger. Not even not lack of production. It's just distribution and market access.
Yeah, and when you say distribution, you mean getting the food grown in point A to point B where somebody doesn't have so much food. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, in the current system, yes.
Well, personally looking at that, I think I mentioned to you earlier, I before we went live, is that I have a research paper that showed that the average tomato eaten in the United States has traveled 1,500 miles by air, sea, or land before it reaches your plate. And so because of the fact that we're still using an antiquated technology called oil and gasoline to move products or jet fuel, and that's a big part of the problem for a number of reasons. But it seems to me that really the only solution is to basically create support systems for a much more locally based agriculture, so that we have more a reliance on farmers markets and less reliance on Cargill and large organizations.
I see that inevitable in the future. I look at the future a lot. I'm 45. My son is 5. And when I look at what his life might be like when he's my age, 40 years from now, that gives me a lot of pondering. And I do see things becoming more regional. As oil, peak quality oil. Quality oil is already peaked. We're going after cheap oil now. So, there's gonna be this gradual reduction, and that's going to affect, international movement, transportation. And so things are going to become more nationalized, which I think has a lot of benefits. I see a lot of positives to the things that are coming. It's not all doom and gloom. I see us coming together, working together, communicating better together. And yes, working with, the national food system and then regional food system. I think one thing that helps drive home the fact that our food's coming from far away is if you look at the farms around you, they're typically growing, huge fields of, GMO soybeans and corn. And really, you keep looking around you, there's not a whole lot that's being grown to feed you in your vicinity, your region at all. To me, that gives me a real sense of insecurity. That makes me very uncomfortable, especially when I'm living in populous areas like I do in the Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I'm 57, and my son Mana will be 3. My first son, Paul Jr., is 39. Mana will be 3 in February, and we have a new one on the way who's should be arriving in July, I believe.
Woohoo! Us too.
Oh, right on. So, I've talked to Penny and Angie about this because I look at the changes. I mean, when I was a kid, there wasn't even fax machines yet. I've seen the development of faxes, cell phones, computers, and as you know, technology is speeding up faster and faster and faster. And I was saying to the ladies, I was saying, our kids could see more change in the first 20 years of their life than I've seen in my entire lifetime. And some of it ain't going to be pretty, and it's definitely a concern to me. It really is a deep concern of mine.
Well,
and
this is a rabbit hole I've spent a lot of time going down and playing out future scenarios. So an interesting resource that's very helpful for this is a book by David Holmgren. David is the co-founder of the permaculture movement. And is alive and very strong in the movement still. He's in Australia. And he wrote a small book called Future Scenarios, where he's juxtaposing potential outcomes based on peak oil and climate change. And he points out this is what the big corporations do as well. So the big corporations will scenario plan so that they're in position to deal with whatever set of circumstances might come. So I highly recommend that book just to get your mind thinking about potentialities, and then what would you do, or how would you prepare yourself best, depending on what plays out. So I spent a long time really kind of looking at all of this, and for me, my life, it's come down to focusing on planting nut trees. Trees in general, but nut trees, because when you look at what created stability and food security throughout most of North America, certainly continental North America, the Native Americans would rely heavily on nut trees. And similar to the Mayans, they would work with the forests in selecting the nut trees. They would some of the cultures would burn the understory around the nut trees. The nuts would draw in the wildlife. The burned understory would also allow them to hunt more easily. So literally, they were able to make it through winters, relying heavily on nuts for them and for the wildlife they brought in. And when I look at the future and I see a lot of glitches potentially happening, I'm like, well, what can I do to secure, something? And to me, it's kind of boiled down to planting nut trees. And so that's my focus, and that's the best answer I've come up with, because I don't think in 40 years, I'm going to be looking back, if I'm still alive, or my son, and saying, man, what was he thinking, wasting his time doing this and that? But, if I plant nut trees, I feel like I'm pretty safe.
Well, I think that's very important. Nuts also store very well. So yes, there's a benefit to that. And one of the things I wanted to get you to do, and I forgot to do that earlier, could you define permaculture for the listeners and share what's the difference between permaculture, if there is any, and what people just consider organic farming in general?
Sure. All right. The elevator pitch for permaculture is permaculture is a way to consciously design landscapes which mimic the patterns and relationships found in nature. That's a mouthful. That's clear. Yeah, okay. It's a holistic approach to landscape design that brings gardening, forestry, alternative energy, natural building, and socioeconomic realities together into designs that then loop together. That work like natural ecosystems do. They feed themselves, sort of like what we were talking about with that full circle. If you put the design in place with as many considerations as possible, it will then start to function on its own. So over time, it has very low maintenance. There's input time and design up front. And then if you do it right and you design, your systems and your landscapes well, then they will function for themselves. It does work. I've been absolutely amazed with the systems that I've put in place, and then literally been pulled away, and they've thrived with neglect. And I think that's always a good design consideration, especially in our busy world, is design for neglect. Put things in place with the concept that they will be neglect, or they will receive harsh conditions, and they will still thrive. They're not high input.
I think that's a very important point for one reason in particular, because most people, I think, associate the concept of having a garden with a lot of work, and they're having a hard time finding time to breathe and to live with the way our economy's designed and all those types of issues, as you know. But when you're talking about a permaculture or your edible landscape systems, if they're developed right in the first place, they are fairly low maintenance. And having studied a lot of Steiner's work, there's a lot of very direct parallels between permaculture design and what Steiner developed as biodynamic farming.
Absolutely. We've inherited sort of this Victorian-esque concept of gardening, which somehow seems to say that if you're not working hard, you're not doing something right in the garden. And that's, to me, that's BS. I mean, if you got a lot of time in a small patch to play around with, then knock yourself out. But, if you want to be, being productive and moving on and doing other things in your life, design systems, that are going to feed themselves. Biodynamics, works on a lot of the same principles. Permaculture pulls from a lot of these wisdoms. Really, permaculture is indigenous knowledge, applied to the modern world and realities.
One of the things, I took a note while you were talking earlier, but I wanted to just wait for a time to interject in it before we get too far from the topic, because the use of oil and energy is obviously heavily involved in issues of farming and our economy. One of the things that's sad for me is I've got a couple of great books in my library looking at all the various patents on free energy technologies and the work of Tesla and others. And it's just a sad fact that we don't need to be using oil at all. We could completely, between hemp products and the various free energy technologies and Tesla-type technologies, and now with research into zero-point field energy technologies, we could move past all this. But there's many, many cases on record of patents being taken away from inventors of these devices, all of a sudden disappearing off the face of the earth, or them being found dead with suicide notes, and the family saying there's no possible way this guy committed suicide. He was way, way too involved in his family, his life, and his work. But really what it all boils down to is large corporations that are making so much money off the oil industry suppressing the use of any of these types of technologies would be far, far better for the environment, and also ultimately would create an entire shift in the way our economy functions.
Yeah. We were doing pretty good before all the oil, came along as well, if you think about it worldwide, compared to what's happening today. And yeah, I've lived many, many years without electricity. I've lived without refrigeration. I have had running water. That has been a key, I will admit, but gravity fed. Really, we don't need these high inputs as much as we think. We've kind of become attached to them, and I think we become fearful about them being reduced or taken away. But we will be fine.
In my research, I looked at over the years. I looked at the work of Major General Robert McCarrison. Are you familiar with his research that he was tasked to do by the British military?
No.
Well, during the First and Second World War, it got worse in the Second World War, but they had, I think it was something like 47% in the First World War. It's 50 to 51% of the recruits in the Second World War were rejected due to being unfit for military duty due to malnutrition and various health problems. So the British government saw this as a threat to national security because, they were drafting people between 17 and 25 years of age, and that's supposed to be the healthiest males of any culture. So they tasked Major General Robert McCarrison, Chief of Medicine, if I remember his title correctly, to find out who the healthiest people in the world were and to study their diets and do research to see if we could figure out how to better feed the population to create more security in case there was another war, which we better hope there isn't. But Robert McCarrison at that time, and this is, I don't know what the years were, but it's, right around the time of the Second World War, found that the Hunzas of, I believe it's northern India, if I remember right, were the healthiest people they could find. So what he did is his research papers outline his research, and he took 1,600 rats and he fed them the exact diet of the Hunza. And then he took 1,600 rats and fed them a diet modeled on the middle class of England. And after 2 years of rat life, two human years, which is a pretty long span for a rat. I don't remember the exact correlation. What he found was that there was no death, no disease death at all amongst the rats living on the Hunza diet. The only death was an occasional maternal death where a mother laid on one of her babies and suffocated or something like that. With the rats eating the English diet, by day 16 of the experiment, they became so violent he had to separate them into separate cages. And at the end of the experiment, when he analyzed the rats on the English diet and he did a medical grade autopsy on every single rat in the study, interestingly, when he analyzed the diseases in the rats, they broke down into 3 categories, which not only were the exact 3 categories of the most common diseases in England and Wales, but in almost the identical proportions.
I can relate. I grew up in the Midlands of England in the late 70s and early 80s, and the food was horrible. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, it's correlated, obviously our diet and our landscapes. What we eat on our plate is what our landscapes look like. So as long as we're, stuck on this annual diet, our landscapes are going to continue. And annual cropping is what's losing the soil the quickest. We're turning the soil, we're keeping it exposed, we're killing it. And really largely, because of our annual agriculture, which affects our bodies.
Well, yeah. It does. And in fact, in my holistic lifestyle coaching program, I took a page out of the Natives playbook and created teaching songs because, the written language is fairly new, and a lot of the great teachers of antiquity didn't want students writing things down because they felt that they started worshiping more the symbols they were using and less the experience they were supposed to be having. So for each of the 4 doctors, I created a song, and I'm going to sing the song for Dr. Diet because it has a lot of key points in it. Dr. Diet, build your temple, a body for your mind. We raise and eat our food with love. It makes our chemistry. Add good water and a smile. Be filled with energy. Eat good organics and be wise. You are what you eat. Eat good organics and be wise. You are what you eat. You are what you eat. Yum, yum. So in that song is actually the essentials that everybody needs to know about diet. And the reason I had to put the word eat good organics is because now we have almost 100 organic certifiers, 95% of which or more are bogus. And my research showed that the reason there's so many studies appearing on television and in journals saying that there's no difference between commercial and organically farmed food is because the large food conglomerates are now creating all these fake organic certifications. They're funding the agricultural programs. And so they send in their so-called organic food and have it compared to the commercial food, which both of them are grown by the same organizations, just that the so-called organics are grown under shell companies under different names. And so they produce this research showing there's no difference in the two to diminish people's interest in organic food so that they're not pressured to start farming organically, which is a bit of a problem.
It's a big problem. And when you realize that, Wal-Mart is the largest distributor of organic food, that pretty much sums it up. And you can't.
Dangerous.
Yeah, you can't trust.
Dangerously.
You can't trust. You have to know really know where your food's coming from. Really know the source.
And that's why I tell people, look, organic farming certifications are fairly expensive for a small farmer. Some of these guys are only making $35,000 a year, out of which they have to run their farm and everything else. So if you're paying 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 for a legitimate certification, but there's not enough appreciation for it to make it a good financial investment, then they end up farming often organically, but not labeling their food organic. But when you go to small farmers markets, of which most cities have, you can find all sorts of excellent food that was either grown with no chemicals or very minimal chemicals that has a much higher nutrient value than anything you can buy in the supermarket.
Yeah, a lot of times you'll see signs that just say beyond organic, meaning that they're not messing with the organic certification, but they practice, good organic practices.
Yeah, just to make a point of how powerful even a small percentage of your diet as organic food can be. When I was doing research on all these issues we're talking about, I became a member of the British Soil Association, which has really a great library of all sorts of research on food and farming and everything that we're talking about here. From my looking into soil associations all over the world, I found the British Soil Association to really be a rich resource. And I found an investigation that looked at the sperm counts of males, and they went all the way back to 1938. And I'm just recalling from memory, so I don't want anyone to quote these statistics exactly, but they're close enough. I think at around 1938, the average male was ejaculating about 138 million sperm per ejaculation or something like that. And then when they did the research, the average male was down to something like 67 million. So very, very reduced. And then what they did is they put them on, they put one group of men on a 25% organic diet, another group on a 50% organic diet, and then a 100% organic diet. And they found that, if I remember right, even 25% made a significant jump in the sperm count. 50%, I think, brought them back up to about where the males in 1938 were on average, but 100% organic diet gave even more improvement. And one of the reasons I'm citing that now is because, as you probably are very aware, in vitro fertilization and problems of men and women not being able to get pregnant. I mean, the woman gets pregnant, of course, but we have men with such low sperm counts, they can't get their wives pregnant. And we have women who just can't get pregnant because their physiology is so out of whack. And a lot of this just tracks right down to diet and lifestyle factors. And, you know, when I see how much organic food Penny can grow in the backyard in 2 bed gardens and probably a half a dozen pots, and it's like she's pulling squash out of there, peppers, all sorts of stuff. It's just like amazing. It's like Christmas. And you know, it's great to take my little boy out there and show him this stuff. And so that's leading me to a question. I know you specialize in teaching people how to make food forests, and that's what your book is about. What's a rough idea of the kind of production someone could get in a sort of a standard backyard space?
Oh, that's a loaded question. It really depends on your approach. I would say from a gardening standpoint, it's been proven by biointensive methods, particularly one man named John Jevons, who's written a wonderful book that I recommend for people who really have never grown anything and want just to begin working and growing vegetables. And I believe his book's called How to Grow Vegetables. I'll have to double check that here. But anyway, he has a very intensive system of spacing, and has been able to prove roughly that on maybe like a quarter of an acre, a vegetarian diet can feed almost a family of 4. So really, a very small area can be very productive. A couple other friends of mine, Eric Tonsmeyer and Jonathan Bates, have created a food forest in their small 1/10 of an acre duplex backyard in Massachusetts, and have created a cornucopia of food and medicinals and plants. And they wrote about it in a book called Paradise Lot, a wonderful read, and really shows the potential how you take, what was a terrible little duplex backyard, even with a large maple tree in it, and how they made it productive. So, space is not really, the limiting factor. It's, how you stack your systems. And we can go into that in different ways. I'll let you decide.
Well, I know from Steiner's work and working with, there's a guy in our area here, San Diego, named Robert Farmer, who is a biodynamic farmer. And for part of the research from my holistic lifestyle coaching program, Dr. Cliff Oliver, who used to teach my courses with me, him and I went out to a large organic community-supported agricultural farm that he was the director of. And so we looked into all sorts of these types of issues, and he was showing, how by putting certain plants together, and even animals and plants together, that it becomes a self-sustaining system. And even, he explained how they use things like clover and other things to create green manuring, so that they let it grow and plow under to mineralize the soil, and all sorts of techniques that people can use to make it more sustainable. But it's a departure from the kind of standard garden concept where you plant just carrots or just tomatoes or just this or just that, and you have a row of this and a row of that. It almost looks much more like a wild situation like you'd see in the forest,
Yeah. And that's a great model, and that can be done small scale, with rabbits and chickens, if you got a small area, small backyard where you're creating that fertility. And then it can really get amped up into what's called silvopastoral agroforestry, which is basically using tree crops, nut trees, fruit trees, and growing them in sort of almost an orchard-like pattern. But then in between your rows, you're running your animals, that are going through, helping the system pulse by eating, the grasses, and helping that soil and the roots pulse, leaving their manure. So there's ways to stack these systems together, whether they're small or large. But yes, the animals, their nutrients, and again, our nutrients are needed in these systems.
Yeah. You know, one of the thing people spend just huge amounts of money on today, as I'm sure you know, is supplements, the majority of which are created from commercially farmed produce that are loaded with potentially, well, certainly not potentially, certainly toxic stabilizers and other non-beneficial agents. And also the fact is that you cannot get the toxins from pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and rodenticides out of the commercially grown crops that ultimately become the product in the bottles that we call supplements. So when it comes to someone who maybe is caught in this sort of, well, if I just take these pills, I'll be okay. What are some of the best medicinal or nutritional herbs people can grow at home in these sort of small bed gardens or apartment balconies or any of the kind of miniaturized home gardening systems?
One of my favorite, and the favorite of many permaculturists, is a plant called Comfrey. And
oh yes, I know
Comfrey used to be known as knitbone. The old monasteries would grow it. So that when wayward travelers would come along with broken and busted up limbs and bruises, they would be able to heal them quite quickly with the Comfrey. And I personally use Comfrey every day as a medicinal. So it's a beautiful plant, vigorous grower. A lot of the varieties have a very deep taproot. So it goes deep into the soil and is be able to, pull up minerals and nutrients, and it brings it up into these beautiful, large, deep green lobed leaves that are very medicinal. I take the leaf internally. There's been some BS research, on rats where they just, fed them an insane amount and said that it's not good. But whereas traditional herbology has used comfrey leaf internally, for eons. So I like to also use it as a salve. So I will take the root and the leaf. I will chop it up and put it in olive oil for about 3 or 4 weeks. I'll strain that out and I'll make a salve with a little bit of beeswax and vitamin E, a little bit of lavender oil, and I'll just make, jars of that and put that, my 5-year-old kid's a real rocket ship too. So he and I are always getting hurt. So it is one of my very, very favorite herbs. It grows quickly, abundantly. If you don't think you have a green thumb, start with comfrey. It'll encourage you. Plant it where you want it to stay. You don't want to try and move it around. If you cut the root up, it will spread. I like to mix it up with my perennials. I plant it around my fruit trees, my nut trees, my bushes, because those deep green leaves that are pulling up minerals from the subsoil are then mulching the topsoil around the plants and also feeding the plants. So it's a win-win, for humans and plants alike. So that's always one of my favorite go-tos.
I have a quick comfrey story to tell you before you rush to the next herb. When I was 15, I was doing some cliff diving at a real dangerous place that only a few people go to. But, being a 15-year-old with a lot of testosterone, if my buddies could do it, I had to do it. So it was a place where there was a sharp bend in a river and you had to have a scout watching, because in the summer they do a lot of people coming down the river in kayaks and on big inner tubes and things. And the river's moving so fast if you're not careful, because you have to run real fast for about 50 yards. Because to get in, it was called the deep hole, and to get into the deep part of the river, you got to clear about a 15-foot granite ledge that extends out into the river. And my scouter waved to me, but all of a sudden he screams at me and says to stop, but I'm like 5 feet from the edge of the cliff, and it's the whole cliff's made of red clay, and because we'd been going back and forth for like a half an hour and our bathing suits were all dripping wet, when I went to try to stop, I couldn't stop. I just slid and I got right to the edge of the cliff and I was teetering, and I realized that I was going to go over, so I just jumped as hard as I could. And I made it just far enough that my right leg cleared the ledge, but my left leg caught the ledge and fractured my left leg in 5 places. And I had a compound fracture and the tibia shot right out through the skin. it was a really nasty thing. But anyhow, one of our family business is wool, and we had a woolen factory. And so we did a lot of work with all the Native American Indians in the area, selling them wool for the arts and crafts trade on Vancouver Island. And my mother just happened to mention to one of these ladies, that I'd had this bad fracture. And she said, oh, you need to get them on Comfrey tea. It's called bone knit tea. So I think she gave some to my mother, and my mother bought a bunch of it. Well, the doctor told me I would probably have to be in that cast for about 4 months because it was a very nasty multiple break. I went back for my 4-week checkup, and I was probably drinking 3 or 4 cups of Comfrey tea a day. And the doctor was literally in shock. He said, I've never seen anybody heal this quick before in my entire career as an orthopedic surgeon from a break like that. What in the hell have you been doing? And really all I'd been doing was drinking Comfrey tea and, of course, eating the food off of our farm. But I ended up taking my cast off after, I think, maybe a little bit over 4 weeks. And I ended up hurting myself again doing skateboard stunts and motorcycle tricks. But the point is that as soon as you said Comfrey, I'm like, oh yes, I know all about Comfrey tea.
It is one of the truly most effective plant herbs that I've ever seen and worked with. I broke 2 toes last week on some coral. I was running after my son.
Ouch.
Yeah, I crunched them, and I had my Comfrey salve. And I just laid up and lathered them in it. And a week later, I'm walking again. I'm hobbling, but my toes look so much better. And I tell you, if I hadn't had that Comfrey, I bet I would not be walking yet. So I really do stand by it because I've seen how fast and effective. A lot of herbs, it's like, yeah, they get all these big claims, but not much happens. With Comfrey, something will happen. You will heal much, much faster. What's another great one in that same vein is Horsetail. It's a running plant. It likes wet areas, but you could probably do it in a pot culture as well. And it's high in silica and calcium, so you could make you can make a Horsetail Comfrey tea to heal bones and heal things really quickly. So I'm a big fan of that. Just know that it could spread. Another one of my favorites is nettles. So yeah, okay. Nettles is an amazing powerhouse, again, full of lots of minerals. We grow a lot of it. It grows as a patch, or you could grow it in pots. You could grow all these things in pots. If you have a limited space and you're in an apartment or you don't have ground to stick things in, you can do pot culture. The trick with pot culture usually is to set it up on a drip irrigation, which is very, very simple. An outfit called DripWorks. So dripworks.com has simplified pot growing for people by having these little simple systems that you put on a timer and will maintain the moisture for you. Because typically when you grow in pots, they dry out and they're better suited to drought-tolerant Mediterranean herbs. But if you put a little drip system on them, you could do Comfrey, you could do the Horsetail, you could do the nettles. And these are copious producing plants. So it's one of the things I like about them. They're easy to grow. Come back to that neglect idea, designed for neglect. So nettles, every spring, we're in Maryland, where we live, and we have food forests, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. But in the early spring, we make what we call food forest pesto, and it's largely based on the nettles, the comfrey, and young horseradish leaves. Some of the Egyptian walking onions are coming up, and we'll just blend all that together and make our food forest pesto, and it's a reboot. It's a mineral reboot to the system every season. For like 3 days, I'll eat nothing but food forest pesto, and the minerals from the nettles really recharge your system. This is what traditional cultures always did. You don't have to rely on the supplements if you're eating the foods that are pumping around you. They're so much better.
Yeah. How about oregano? I know I use oregano oil, and oregano is a very powerful herb. Is that an easy one to grow?
Absolutely. Very, very tough. Very, very drought tolerant too. So you could put that in a pot and forget about watering it, and it would be fine. and herb spirals too. We're gonna get around to that, I think, because it's got stones in it, and I know you want to talk about stones.
Yeah. And my next kind of step I wanted to go into is, one, I wanted to create a little bit of awareness on the issue of topsoil and the microorganisms. The chemical industry has done a very good job of kind of blinding people to the amazing network of microorganisms in the soil and all the amazing things they do. And I won't go into all the science on that here because it'll make a long segue. And I do talk all about that for those that are interested in my DVD or video program called Nutrition, the Dirt Facts. But, when we look at the humus content, humus being the dead organic matter for those that aren't familiar with the term, and what healthy organic soil has or out in nature in the forest, it's generally 4 to 6% is considered ideal. But research shows that most commercially farmed soils range between 0 and 1.5% humus. The reason I'm bringing that up is because in her book, Lady Eve Balfour's book, The Living Soil and the Holly Experiment. Are you familiar with that book?
Only marginally.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. She is one of the pioneers of the term organic and did extensive research on organic food and farming and its effect on people and animals. And it's a mind-blowingly good book. It's called The Living Soil and the Holly, Haughtley Experiment, originally published in 1943. She describes in the book how 1 cubic foot of humus will hold 60 pounds or about 7 gallons of water. And when we were talking earlier about the destruction of land and runoff, and we have a lot of problems with water shortages in places all over the world, one of the things that I find frustrating as a guy who's researched all this stuff is that government agencies seem to just turn a blind eye to this whole destruction of the microorganisms and not caring for the topsoils. Yet in national parks, for example, I was on vacation. Penny and I were on vacation one year, and we went to a park in, where was it? In Arizona, maybe Flagstaff, Arizona, I think. And I'm walking around in the park, and they had these signs posted up at regular intervals. And I'm going to read you the sign. Now, the sign shows a picture of like a hiker's boot and his heels touching the ground. And underneath it, there's just all sorts of little tiny microorganisms freaking out like, don't step on me, don't step on me. And this is what the sign says. Now, this is a U.S. government sign. At first glance, the desert topsoil looks like an old dry crust. Take a closer look. It's alive! Exclamation. That lumpy black crust is actually a living web of bacteria, moss, lichen, fungus, and liverworts. Microbiotic crust controls erosion, stores water, fertilizes the soil, and provides seed beds for plants. Seed beds for all plants from wildflowers to trees. Don't bust the crust. Stay on the trail. 1 foot can crush a decade's worth of growth. And when I saw that sign, I took a picture of that and I said, Penny, look at this. This is the kind of silliness that drives me nuts, because they're willing to tell you the truth in a park, but they're not willing to tell you the truth about what we're doing to the entire planet with commercial farming and poisoning the topsoil and destroying the microorganism populations. But the point I'm driving at is, as we reduce the humus content in the soil or the organic material in the soil, we have lots of problems with water wastage, water runoff, soil erosion. And I noticed that you have a chapter devoted to rainwater harvesting, swales or catchment areas in your book. Could you share some thoughts on what we can do in general to reduce water wastage and what people living in areas where there's water shortages can do to capture more water for personal consumption in their gardens or for their gardens?
Right. A lot of people have rain barrels that in a good rain will fill up oftentimes in 2 or 3 minutes, and then they overflow, and that water's heading off. Whereas if you shape your land, if you shape the landscape to harvest that water, it passively comes into the soil and is held there like a big sponge. Now, most of our landscapes are sort of sloped to move water away as fast as possible. So you take the typical suburban yard, it's a slope, and there's usually a ditch at the bottom before the road, and it's off contour, which means that it's shooting water away as fast as possible. So rain falls on the house, rain falls on the driveway, it goes across the grass, it's got chemicals from the roof, it's got chemicals from the cars in the driveway, it's probably picking up chemicals on the lawn, and it's shooting away as fast as possible into the watershed, right? This is our typical design.
Right.
So what we can do is we can start to create, swales. You could think of them as ditches on contour, which means that they're perfectly perpendicular to the slope. So let's say down 20 feet from your downspout, you dig out a basin and you put that soil on the downhill side to create a berm, a raised bed, right? I then usually fill that basin in with wood chips or something. So as that water's coming down off the roof, it falls into that basin. And since it's on contour, it's not shooting the water anywhere. It stops and it infiltrates into the groundwater. And it's held there and it's filtered and it's cleaned. And then the things growing on that berm just go bonsai. They grow amazingly because they have that berm gives them a little bit of aeration, yet they have access to all that water. It's an amazing win-win scenario where I would say for a large majority of my clients and designs, especially in suburban and on large tracts of land, contouring the land is one of the key elements to regenerating the soil. And harvesting the water. So yes, and this can be done on all types of landscapes. If you have an opportunity to sink water, in permaculture we talk about slowing, sinking, and spreading water. You want to be able to try and hold on to that as much as possible. And rain gardens, swales on contour are a variation of a rain garden. There's another practice called hugelkultur beds. Hugelkultur is an old Germanic word, basically meaning wood covered with soil. So it's taking prunings and other organic matter that might typically leave your site, and it's covering it with soil. You're basically creating compost in place. It's working with what elements are there to work with and not exporting them, sinking them and using them. So there's a lot of techniques, even for small urban areas. Rainwater Harvesting for Dry Lands and Beyond, a book by Brad Lancaster, is amazing and will give you concepts for all types of landscapes.
For people listening to the podcast, many of which maybe aren't gardeners or are minimal gardeners, I just want to say that Michael's book has lots of excellent pictures, and it's a really beautiful, glossy, full color. It's an absolutely gorgeous book, Michael. I must say, this book makes me want to go get in the garden. And Penny can tell you that, I grew up on a farm, so there's a couple of things that I kind of stay away from. One is anything that's like farming work, and two, washing dishes, because we had a big family, and one day we had guests over for dinner, and it was, excuse me, it was a neighbor, the neighbor from the farm next door. And after the dinner, he looks at my mom and dad as they're telling us to wash the dishes, and we all have that look like, oh God, there's a mountain of dishes and stuff all over the kitchen. And the guy looks at my dad and he says, why don't you buy a dishwasher with this many kids and such a big family? And my dad looks at him and says, I have 5 of them. And he pointed to us. But the point I'm making is that Michael's book not only shows you how to do this, but it's easy to follow. I mean, anybody I think could follow your book. It's very, very well done. And thank you also for sharing all the references, because our podcast staff will put a reference list together. They'll go through the podcast and pull all these out. But if you can remember any of them off the top of your head and want to share it with us, that's great too. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about, I think is really hot topic right now. Joe Rogan had a podcast with Paul Stamets, one of the world's top, probably the world's top mycologists. And that created huge awareness around the medicinal and psychedelic benefits of mushrooms, the nutritional benefits of mushrooms. And you talk about that in your book. Can you share what any of us can do for ourselves, either by consuming various mushrooms or growing our own? And how hard is it to grow mushrooms?
It is very, very easy to work and grow mushrooms. Even inside an apartment, if you have an outside area as well, they're very easy to grow. It's just one of the things that I do a lot of workshops on. Sometimes I feel almost guilty doing, having people pay me to do a workshop because it's really so easy, but doing it helps. Realize that. And yeah, one of the chapters in my book's about how to grow mushrooms outdoors. Now, the distinction here is that these types of mushrooms are grown outdoors versus a lot of cultivated mushrooms are grown indoors in sterilized conditions. And unfortunately, a lot of the mushrooms that grow in those conditions kind of taste that way, like they were grown on sterilized sawdust blocks in a warehouse.
Kind of mealy and empty
you're missing the natural elements in those from growing outside. Whereas if you grow mushrooms on logs, like oak logs or poplar logs, maple logs, you can grow some of the most delicious and some of the most medicinal mushrooms. I mean, shiitakes are very medicinal. I try to eat shiitakes every day as part of my diet and part of my medicine. And they're so good. And when you grow them on logs outside, they are exquisite because they're out in the elements. They're getting the natural cycles of life. And of course, we've been able to gather over the centuries some of the best strains of say, shiitakes. So you're getting the best of the wild at home. So basically my pattern is that I will cut wood while it's dormant. And this is kind of a positive too, because our forests generally have been clear cut many times, and they regenerate in a very crowded way. A bunch of saplings come up.
Right.
So to help sort of bring that mature canopy about again, you can go in and you can thin these saplings. So you can play a positive forestry role while you're getting your wood, right? Or if you have a tree, your neighbor's tree, or somebody down the street's doing tree work, ideally you're getting that wood when it's dormant. So I do that in our neck of the woods around late February, early March. I'll let the wood sit, for about a month, and then as temperatures warm up, about 50 degrees during the day, then I'll get what we call spawn, and usually that's little wooden dowels or sawdust that have mycelium on it, little thread-like white cells. And I'll drill the log and I'll inoculate into that, and I'll put a little, beeswax over it. And then I'll store that log in a shady place behind a bush that gets rained on. And I'll basically forget about it and come back a year later and keep an eye on it, and it'll start flushing mushrooms. And depending on the size of the log, it'll do that for 5 to 8 years with me doing nothing more except for harvesting it.
But you're putting the culture in yourself,
yes, that's
correct?
I inoculate it with the spawn, little dowels or sawdust. It's really kind of fun. It's kind of like whack-a-mole, at the fair.
Yeah, I'm just saying that because, as you know very well, a lot of mushrooms are poisonous. So if you just take a chunk of wood and throw it in your backyard and then eat whatever pops up, you might not be doing yourself any favors.
Yeah, go ahead.
How much wood does it take? I mean, one of the things I've noticed is we get firewood here for the winter. I mean, I'm in San Diego, so our winter's not very wintry compared to most places. I mean, I grew up on Vancouver Island. Our winter is like a beautiful warm day compared to what I grew up in. But I noticed that like one couple of years, I haven't used all the firewood. I buy a cord of wood, and then a third of the cord would end up just sitting there. And I noticed it was within a year, within one season, through the summer and back, it was already growing mushrooms all over
so
it.
Go ahead.
So couldn't you just go, like if someone just bought some firewood and just did what you said, wouldn't that be pretty much just as easy?
If the firewood was cut dormant from healthy living trees. So there's always ambient fungi. As soon as temperatures get above 50 degrees or so, there's ambient fungi. It's on your shirt, it's on your hat. I mean, we're all carrying it around, right? So it's everywhere. So if you have wood that's out there, fungi are going to land on it and begin, consuming it, because that's what they do. They're eating the cellulose and the woody material, the lignin. And so, no, you do not want to grab an old piece of wood because it probably already has a different fungi in it. And one of the beauties of growing your own mushrooms is the safety. You know that you inoculated that with shiitake. And even if you've never grown a mushroom before, a description of a shiitake is pretty clear. And the picture is clear, So you go up to your mushroom log, and when the mushroom's popping out, you take a picture of a shiitake and you say, oh, yeah, that's shiitake. If it's some funky orange polka dot mushroom, no, you don't eat it. But what you're supposed to be getting, from that log. So it does take away a lot of that danger of, wild harvesting.
Yeah, and I know Paul Stamets sells all sorts of fungal spores for doing this type of stuff.
Yes.
I think it's fungi.com.
I think it's Fungi Perfecti. And yes, Paul Stamets is the guru, man. I think he's part fungi himself. He's an awesome ambassador. I always encourage people to watch his TED Talk. He will blow your mind about the universe of fungi. And what most of us don't realize is that we would, as a species, we wouldn't exist on this planet without fungi. They're a keystone species. We don't give them credit for our existence very much. And he points out also that through the previous, great extinctions of this planet, the species that survived were the ones that paired with fungi. And here we are again, moving into another great extinction. And my understanding is that one of our best bets for regenerating the planet and staying on it is to pair and work with fungi.
Yeah, I like the psilocybin producing fungi myself, but that's another podcast.
Yep. You should get Paul Stamets on for that one.
Yeah, I will. I'll see if I can get him on. I think he said in one of his talks that the fungi aren't they one of the largest, if not the largest living organism on the planet?
Yeah, there's a huge one. I can't remember if it's an organ or not, but it's a huge mass. They're far out. Again, recommend that TED Talk. 18 minutes will change your reality and understanding about fungi in our world.
And just so people know, his last name is spelt, let's see, Stamets, Paul Stamets, Stamets. If you search him on Google, you'll find him. And he's got a lot of great supplements. I use his detox support. I use a few of them. I use lion's mane for stimulating neurogenesis, and I encourage the ladies, because I have two wives, so Penny and Angie both work raising mana, so we give him lion's mane mushrooms to help his brain growth and development as well. And you can get USDA organic lion's mane mushrooms at most health food or big decent shopping stores too. In your book, you talk about stones, and you show your chapter on herb spirals, the ultimate garden bed. And you haven't been to my place here. I don't know if Scott Ford told you about how I charge water with stones, but I do a lot of exercise with stones, and I build stone stacks and various formations and mandalas out of stone. And my soul just guided me to how to charge water. And it was just a kind of a mind-blowing thing that came out of that. And sometime when you're up here, I can send you a picture. But my point was, I loved your section there, because some beautiful things that you do with stones in your book, and it really adds a lot of gorgeous effects to the garden. And there's just so many benefits to stones. So could you share a little some tips on what people can easily do with stones to enhance their home gardens and some of the amazing benefits that stones offer in a garden?
The herb spiral is kind of what I call a classic edible architecture. It has so many functions, and it's a great planter. It's a large planter for the space it takes up. And since it's spiraling, it's creating more footprint for planting. So this is extra helpful for people with limited space. You don't have to have ground to build it on. You could build it on a patio, a driveway. That's another big benefit for these. And you could even go further in playing with microclimates, where the top of the herb spiral, very sunny, windy, you do your Mediterranean herbs. You do your rosemary and thyme. And as you come down the spiral facing east, getting a little protection from that late afternoon sun, you could do things like parsley. Coming down again, the southern face of it, really hot and warm again. Another great place for your Mediterranean herbs, whether that's lavender, basil. And then coming down to the low part in the north where it's a little more moist, you could do landcress and very cool, more wet-loving herbs. So it creates this cornucopia, this opportunity within this small footprint. And then additionally, the stones, and this may not be pertinent to your hot weather spot in San Diego, but it creates a microclimate. So it warms up early in the season, and then it goes later into the season. And in our experience, a lot of things that would not overwinter well in our climate will overwinter in and on the herb spiral because of that added sort of heat effect from the stones. And then the stones also create perennial habitat for beneficials. Whether that be salamanders, spiders, beneficial insects that help balance the insect ecology for your landscape. So maintaining that perennial habitat is key, whether it's piles of sticks, piles of rocks, water sources. So the herb spiral looks really good. It appeals, even to front yard, fancy suburban neighborhoods and restaurants, but yet has a lot of function built into it. Yeah, they're a favorite of mine. And you could even play with them. You could do like a double spiral, yin yang. I could see you doing one of those out there, Paul.
Yeah, well, I looked at your book and I just wow, I'm going to have to make that a project, because my whole front yard at my home in Vista is just all stone sculptures, and people love it and take pictures of it all the time and stop and look and talk. And it's amazing how stones captivate something very primal in people. But one of the things, too, about stones is they are very, very useful and effective for water conservation. Because I lift stones, I'm always amazed. We've had some heavy rains up here lately, and when I go out and pick those stones up, they're a lot of them are like sponges, man. They'll double their weight after they sit on the ground and get rained on for a while. And I've noticed just from working with them and seeing how the plants interact with them, they're extremely good for controlling the flow of water, regulating water use.
There's another technique for stacking stones on a garden bed. What happens is the air temperature changes, the water actually condenses on the stones, and they act as little irrigators. So even just doing like a tripod of stones in a garden bed will create habitat, will change the microclimate a little bit, and then will actually begin to attract moisture.
You mean just stacking them like a little pyramid?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing stuff. And one thought that came to me is, of course, we're going to have people listening to the podcast of a range of financial flexibility, but a number of my clients and people that I know that are busy people and may not necessarily, want to jump up and say, oh, wow, I'm going to go gardening, will hire gardeners to come do a lot of the kinds of things that you share in your book. And they don't really have to do much at all except go out and pick the herbs or the vegetables or whatever. And I know you told me, I think you're phasing out of that part of your business where you would build these types of gardens for people, but there are people out there that do them. We've got a biodynamic gardening consultant that came to our house and helped Penny kind of revamp the whole garden area in the house, and it's just beautiful. So the point being is, for those of you that want to have the benefits of a garden and want to have some of these medicinal herbs and vegetables and increase your sperm count and fertility with something easy to do, it probably costs you a lot less money to hire a skilled gardener to get your resources right in your backyard than it would be to keep going into doctors and having in vitro fertilization. And some people seem to not realize that if your body's not healthy enough to reproduce and you use tricks to do it, you open the door wide for having potentially unhealthy children being born and children with all sorts of birth defects. So I think when we realize that a lot of the things that medicine's making truckloads of money on all boil down to just getting back to the basics, that's one of the things I really loved about your book and your whole approach is there's actually a lot we can do. And if the most we can do is just remember that the best vote we have is our dollar, and that if we start supporting the local farmers at the farmers markets and buying real certified organic food and making little steps to enhance the quality of our life, because every time we spend money on something that supports the planet that way, we're all really making a change. And eventually we have to starve some of these large corporations out. These big corporations are like, giant dinosaurs with massive diets. And if we just stop feeding them, then they have no choice but to go out of business or start providing the kind of products that we're demanding. So bringing this amazing podcast to a close, is there anything you'd like to share as a wrap up or some final comments or wake up calls? And also, where can people find more about you, your products, your books, or hire you as a consultant?
Sure. Backing up a step there, I would encourage people to look for businesses that are doing edible landscaping and permaculture. There are a lot of startups because there has been a growth and interest for people having other people help them get their garden started. So even if they're just helping you for a year or two, you also get the education from them, and then hopefully transition into getting your own hands in the earth, because that's really where a lot of the healing takes place.
It is healing. It's amazingly healing. One of my favorite things is taking my little boy outside and just being barefooted, and he loves to stack stones. And it's been fun because as he's grown, he can pick up bigger and bigger stones. So it's like I get to see this progression, but it's so natural. And he just absolutely loves being in the dirt and loves all these natural things. And, I as much as being on a kid, my parents worked us like, slaves. So my childhood experience on a farm was more of like a boot camp in the military. But now that I'm an older man and I look back, I realized how amazing of a gift it was to be raised on a farm, and how it gave me this incredible foundation of health and vitality and strength. And people spend all this money going to the gym, but if you just spend some time in your yard working with stones and digging some dirt and hoeing and shoveling, and it's just absolutely amazing. You get connection to the elements, you can breathe fresh air, you can be with the family, and you get to actually eat the products of your own labor. And it's really closes the circle, and it makes your home a sacred space, and it reconnects you to the earth. And then you realize that we are inherently an expression of the earth, and that she really needs us to be aware of her needs, because we've gotten into this habit of just taking and not giving back. And there's no place better than a garden, even a small garden, to close the loop and participate in that organic cycle.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Made me think. Yesterday, my son was moving these big chunks of coral on the beach around, and he's like, "Look at me, I'm Paul Check."
Ah, that's cute.
So yes. Another quote that came to mind: Jeff Lawton is a very well-known permaculturist. I recommend his online material and videos as well. But here's a quote that goes something like, all the problems of the world can be solved in the garden. And that takes some time to chew on. At first, I was like, hold on, no way. And the more I sit and think about it, I think there's a lot of truth in that as well. So yes, it's healing for us, but then it's also a space where a lot of the challenges that we're facing and going to face can be worked out. It's a good space to come together over. But yeah, I got something I want to talk about. I can't not talk about pawpaws.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I was so busy talking about everything else, and I actually asked you to talk about that too, because one of my students who became a vegetarian was having a hard time getting enough protein into his body, and his research led him to pawpaws, and he was telling me how amazing they were. And then when you mentioned it to me, I said, oh, wow, you got to talk about pawpaws, and you said you have a great source to get them. So that's something I'd love for you to share about.
The pawpaw is the only member of the custard apple family, which is all tropical, subtropical. It's the soursop, the guanabana, the cherimoya. It is the only member of that family that has traveled north into the cold regions, all the way up to, southern Canada. And it is basically a tropical tree that took that hike on receding glaciers over millenniums and produces an absolutely exquisitely flavored custard-like tropical fruit, and grows wild in at least 26 states in the U.S. and is obviously very adaptive in being grown way outside of its native range. And I'm a big fan of it. Maybe that's partly because, I lived in the tropics and worked with all of its relatives there. And now that I'm back in the north, that's my connection. But it is really an anomaly. It's a phenomenal tree plant. It's very medicinal as well. South Korea has planted millions of these trees just for their medicinal qualities that's in their leaves and twigs. So it's a powerful species. We've been celebrating it with a pawpaw festival every September when it harvests in our neck of the woods in Maryland. And the interest is phenomenal. We sell out, and we have to limit the people that come to the festival. There's a big festival in Ohio that's been going on for 20 years that gets like almost 10,000 people coming to it. So this is something very real, very exciting that will not let you down as far as a delicious experience. So the pawpaws, when they're cultivated, you got the select cultivars of pawpaws, can be very large, easily a pound, the size of a large mango. When you open them up, they have this custard flesh, usually yellow to orange, and it's literally like eating dessert. And it has flavors of banana and mango and pineapple in it. And they're very rich. They have a full amino count. They have all the essential amino acids in them, which is phenomenal.
It is, yeah. That's why my friend was telling me about them, because they really are like, for a person who needs to get more protein in their diet without eating meat, say a vegan, vegetarian type lifestyle, they turn out to be an amazing support system for that.
Yeah, and
lifestyle.
If you're big into fruits and you're relying on fruits as a big part of your diet, in comparisons with, bananas and apples and oranges, they have higher protein and fat. They've got 3 times as much, vitamin C as an apple. They're powerhouses. I mean, it's hard to eat more than one pawpaw. They're so rich and satisfying. You can almost think of it like, like a avocado fruit. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I'm actually the book I'm working on right now, which I hope to have out in June in print, is called For the Love of Pawpaws. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah. And if you're in our neck of the woods, Maryland, come to our festival, or they're popping up around the country. They're really, it's a renaissance. Because it's also a plant that's been in the woods, and it was something culturally that we used to interact with. I think it comes back to us losing our roots and looking for them again. And, I think part of that, the pawpaw offers that. It has a deep tap root that goes deep into the earth. So it's drawing us in many ways. And I'm working with that energy to guide people, back toward perennial agriculture. For me, it's a bit of a poster child, and I'll take any interest toward perennial agriculture I can get. So I'm working with that a lot, and I hooked up a discount for your listeners, Paul, from Integration Acres. So Integration Acres is a place in Ohio, a guy named Chris Schmiel. He's also a permaculturist, and he started the Ohio Pawpaw Festival. That's in its 20th year. So he's got a lot of frozen pulp, which he's taken the work out of. That's one of the challenges is pulping a pawpaw. But he's got it frozen,
right.
And he's got a lot of other things too. But I think I hooked up a good 10% discount for people going through you, Paul.
Do they need to say anything specific when they make the order? I imagine it's a web-based
order, and we'll make up a code, whatever you want. We'll make it Paul Check.
Okay, Paul Check. Paul Check for your 10% discount on what turns out to be one of the most amazing high-protein fruits in the world. That I've got great feedback from the people that I know using it, including vegetarian athletes. So that's fantastic. Michael, where can people find out more about you and your books and your services?
The most comprehensive would be my website. My business name is Ecologia. It's a Portuguese word for ecology. So it's ecologiadesign.com. My site has a lot of good information on it. A lot of my book is transposed on that site. Socially, I would say I'm mostly on Instagram at Permaculture Ninja. I have a couple of different Facebook pages, one under my name. I have a new one under the For the Love of Pawpaws, under my original book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist. So, I'm pretty easy to find.
Did you give us the website for the pawpaw orders?
Integration Acres. I believe that's the full site name of it, and we'll put it in your notes.
integrationacres.com,
yes.
I imagine. Okay, yeah. Well, so for those of you listening, look in the show notes. 10% discount. Paul Check is the secret code. It's not so secret anymore, and I hope it's not secret, so you get to enjoy this. I'm going to get a hold of these things myself. I think someone gave me some a while back because I remember the description of it that you gave and the flavor of it. And so I'm excited to get a hold of some more and get my little boy on that with his mushrooms. And
it's great. It's great in smoothies. It'll freeze and stay frozen for almost a couple of years. I pulled out frozen pulp for 2 years, and it's been fine. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, Michael, it's been an amazing journey we've taken together, and I hope everybody listening's really enjoyed it. And, Michael and I, we both talked about the importance of not just having a doomsday conversation, because sometimes the facts of the soil and corporate industry and clear cutting the land and all the things we're talking about can just be overwhelming for people. But I just want to close by saying that, the first step to change is awareness, and the podcast gives you awareness. And then doing the things like going to local farmers markets, purchasing more certified organic food. If you're not sure whether the food's real organic or not, one simple thing to do is, like, if you go to a supermarket and it's a bag of carrots and it says Joe's Organic Certification, all you got to do is search that name on the internet, call them, and say, what does it take to get your organic certification? If all you've got to do is pay money, but there's no requirement for them to test your soil and for you to go through what's called a gestation period, you can rest assured it's a bogus organic certification. Those of you that want to learn more about working with your own body and soul to get guidance on diet can look at my webinar, Primal Pattern Eating, which is at thecheckinstitute.com. And I show you 3 key ways of working with your body, one through what I call logging, so you can track what you're eating and your symptom responses to food. The next one's muscle testing, and the third one's soul connection, where I teach you how to connect to your own soul and take guidance from your soul. And the muscle testing technique and the soul connection technique work very, very well. So if you're walking through a supermarket and there's all these different food options in front of you, maybe 3 or 4 different organic options, you're not sure, you can just ask your body. It'll tell you. It knows. It'll know which of those options are the most nutritious. If you can connect with your soul, which is a deeper practice, it'll tell you. You can ask your soul if this is real or not real. Should I buy it or not? Should I eat it or not? And so if you like that kind of information, check out my Primal Pattern Eating webinar series, which is now an online course. And if you like that kind of information, that's what our Holistic Lifestyle Coaching program is all about, which starts with Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1 online, which is designed for you to get yourself healthy. It's not a technical course. It's really about putting all the methods I share in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and others into practice so that you have personal awareness and experience of how powerful diet and lifestyle factors that are easy to manage can change your life. And then if you get excited and want to share that knowledge as a professional, Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2 is our entry-level professional training program, a comprehensive 5-day course where we teach you how to do a very thorough assessment of a person's diet and lifestyle. And we give you a lot of training on how to coach people. And that progresses to HLC 3, where we go into advanced assessment and correction. So there's lots available for you through the resources Michael shared, that I've shared, through the Czech Institute. And what a great time we've had together, Michael. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the love you're sharing with the world.
It's been fun surfing the 4D wave with you.
Right on, bud. Well, I'll look forward to getting this podcast out. So we'll talk again soon. Be well.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Czech and today's guest, Michael Judd. You can get Michael's Kindle book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist, free on Amazon until April 11th. Michael has also arranged a 10% discount on pawpaw pulp for Paul's listeners. Simply go to integrationacres.com and enter the code PaulCzech at checkout. You can find Michael on Facebook, www.facebook.com/For the Love of Pawpaws, and also www.facebook.com/Edible Land Perm Twist, or connect with him on Instagram at Permaculture Ninja. Follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living 4D Podcast, or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living 4D with Paul Czech. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulczechsblog.com and the Czech Institute's blog at czechinstitute.com/blog.